Hello, everyone. Welcome to all our friends, viewers, stakeholders, fans of Africa Rise TV and Africa Rise with Susan West. Yes, it's a beautiful weekend here in London. It's a beautiful Saturday. It's not very cold and not so warm, just perfect. Yeah, so as you join our broadcast this evening, please share and invite your friends to join in on the conversation. And of course, and as usual, send in your questions and comments. Our guest is waiting in the wings. Dr. Jabari will be joining us shortly. And so, yes, if you haven't liked, followed, or subscribed to our channels, please do so. It's Africa Rise TV on Facebook, Africa Rise TV on YouTube and Instagram. I hope you have missed me because I have missed you a whole lot. So, without taking too much of your time, I will be bringing our guest on screen. Good evening, Dr. Jabari.
Yes,
Thank,
good evening. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Um, Thank you for taking out time from your busy schedule to join us here, all the way from the United States. And as usual, you are representing Africa in your attire.
Thank you so very much. It's high time that as Africans we realize that we must wear Africa and capture our signs and symbols in our fashion statement.
Absolutely. And to our topic today, powerful voices, the intersection of art and activism. There is no better person to have a conversation in this area. So, really quickly, Dr. Jabari, you have many lovely, beautiful names. I just don't want to do injustice by trying to say those names first. I want to hear you say all your names for us, all of them.
My name's Dr. Nana Kaka Akamune Kese Jata Kese Jabari.
Beautiful names, beautiful African names, I must say. And do you want to give a little background to what you do? And especially, I know a lot about what you do, but our viewers would like, I would like for you to give our viewers a little background as to what you do in the arts and in politics and everything that has to do with you.
Wonderful. I am simply a master tailor, what you call a fashion designer. I am a wardrobe consultant and wardrobe engineer. I'm also a visual anthropologist and a jeweler. I work for the House of Kese Jabari, a fashion company based in Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Georgia, and Miami, Florida. I also work in a company called Warrington Consulting LLC. I work as a systems or subject matter expert. I work as a consultant and I work as a visual anthropologist. I also work in areas of public advocacy. I work for a company called Branded Global, based out of North Carolina, and we are the biggest or largest brand placement company in the world. I represent the African desk and also work here in the United States.
Thank you so
And I'm
much.
pretty notorious as a creative on the continent of Africa.
That I'm very aware of. And I'm very interested to know how you are able to use your position to connect the diaspora to the continent of Africa.
As a subject matter expert or as one who is in the business of connecting continents and people, over the last couple of years, we've built bridges across to Africa, and we are developing a digital office of great minds who want to speak truth to power, great minds who are standing on the backs of giants of the continent, giants that have come before us to say that this is a task that must be done. We are working assiduously to rebrand Africa as not the next thing, but the in thing, as the thing, the cradle of civilization, the beginning of where it all began, the expansion of the people of our continent and our cultures.
Interesting. I do. I also am aware that you have a lot of. I'm not sure how far you go with Dr. Arikana Chayombo Require, but she is a very vocal person that the continent of Africa and the young people of Africa have come to know and love so much. So I'm not sure in your capacity what you have been able to achieve so far as connecting Africa to the diaspora.
Ambassador Arikana Chimhambori Kwao is someone I have tremendous respect for. I call her the mother queen of the continent, Mother Africa. I work with her, or I have worked with her in various capacities. Currently, we're working on a couple of projects on the continent. I also work with other mentors out of the continent. I work with Professor Pierre Lumumba. And what we've done in the past years is to continue to build and weld that bridge. We believe that for Africa to develop, we must invest in our people. We must invest in infrastructure. So there's a natural drive or propensity towards developing Africa so that Africa can be the Africa that we want. I have worked in various capacities. We continue to build that bridge, and we continue to believe that one day we'll be able to sit down in the Committee of Nations and say, we as a people, we are Black, we are proud, and we are Africans.
Talking about developing Africa and building Africa, do you feel discouraged when you do so much and then the next event that occur on the continent has to do with wars and fighting? For instance, recently there has been another war started in the Sudan, and there are people talking in different quarters saying that Africa continuously fights a war that is not hers, because there is the idea that the war in Sudan has to do with a faction of the government in support of the United States and a faction of the government in support of Russia. How true is that? And does whatever it is, does that in any way affect the work that you have started to do with Professor Lumumba and the likes of Dr. Arikana?
Not at all. If for any effect, it encourages us to work harder and stronger. You know, Africa has to develop, and Nigeria sits strategically on the map of Africa as a trigger. If you turned the map of Africa anti-clockwise, you will see that Nigeria seems or looks like a trigger of a gun. So for Africa to explode, for Africa to come off its own, we must trigger that gun, which is Nigeria. So in areas of agriculture, areas of infrastructural development, in energy, we must begin to reposition our thinking and reposition the brand Africa and develop Africa so Africa can compete internationally or globally. It's a work in progress. It's one step at a time. We must drive investments to that continent. We currently have partners on the continent, World Holding Tanzania Limited, in the areas of agriculture, doing dynamic things that will continue to change that and export our agricultural products to the global market. We'll do the same in fashion. In music, our young boys are doing great work. You have people like Burna Boy, you have people like Davido, you have people like Whiskey coming to the international capitals of the world and changing the dynamics, as it were. Fashion designers have to do the same. We're forming a coalition of African fashion designers to begin to redefine the African fashion statement, or the contemporary African fashion statement, on the fashion capitals of the world, the fashion capitals, or the fashion catwalks of Paris, London, and Milan. We're beginning to say, allow us to define our fashion statement. Let's begin to propagate a fashion that speaks Africa, yeah, Africa, a fashion that captures our signs, our symbols, and our sound, a fashion that celebrates our humanity, even our idiosyncrasies. We must begin to celebrate Mother Africa. We must begin to say that this is who we are and interpret that contemporary fashion definition into the traditional African fashion statement to create a new look that is contemporary Africa. So that a young boy, my young son who is 17 or 19 on the streets of Atlanta, can buy a Kessie Jabari and walk bold and say, this is made in Nigeria. We're also working with the Oni Ife, Oba Adeyeye Babatunde Eniton Ogunwusi, to develop a line called Kabiyesi. Kabiyesi is a line that we will showcase and market globally. We did something on that on the signposts or the signboards of the New York Times Square a couple of years ago by celebrating Kabiesi, he who cannot be questioned. That we're trying to define in our fashion. And I think sports and other areas of human endeavor will speak speed and be part of this whole regeneration.
Wow, that's interesting and very exciting thing to learn about. I wanted to ask, you talk about Nigeria being a trigger if you turned the map of the continent of Africa around. If Nigeria is a trigger, and as so many people have um, imagined that if Nigeria got it right, that Africa will come of age, what would you say about the current political realities that is about to unfold in Nigeria?
In as much as I want to be careful with what I say, because the matter is now in court, but suffice to say that we must begin to speak truth to power. We must begin to rearrange and reorganize into various portmanteaus our political viewpoints and our political lifestyle. Democracy is government for the people, government of the people. Democracy is not a government of a cabal. We must begin to say truth to power. Young men should begin to rise from the crannies, from the hamlets of Nigeria and speak truth to power and say, Mr. Power, it is time. It's our time to begin to change our realities. There's no reason why a young boy in the streets of Kaduna or a young girl in the streets of Warri will go hungry for one night. There's no reason why our medical facilities are not equipped. We have no reason whatsoever. To us, much is given and much is expected, and much we must give. So we must begin to rise up and begin to speak truth to power and get the cabal out of our system. We must begin to take care of our masses, the masses of our people. We must begin to say every Nigerian is born equal. Every Nigerian must succeed. And that is possible because we've been blessed with abundant resources.
That is very profound, and I do agree with what you said. Um, Still going back to the work that you do as someone propagating the beautiful story and picture of Africa, and recently when the war started in the Sudan, there was a situation where Africans who were trapped in there wanted to exit the country from certain countries, through certain countries like Egypt. And there was a quagmire. There was a lot of problems where there was discrimination towards Nigerians. I'm not sure other countries were involved, but there was a lot of issues with the Egyptians not letting through some people from certain countries. And for me, it only raised the question of all the talk and all the work. People like yourselves, Dr. Arikana, PLO Lumumba, and many alike, many of us using our platforms to voice and encourage oneness in the unity of Africa. How do you think that we still get to this point where Africans are treated as though they are foreigners on their continent? And how can we begin to make change the thinking or the mindset or operations or protocols that are taken in different countries so that Africans in their own continent will not be treated as though they are um, foreigners?
I cannot pretend to be on the same plateau with the likes of Ambassador Arikana Chihumburi Kwao. Neither am I on the same level with people like PLO Lumumba. But suffice to say that we've used our little voices on our own mountaintops to begin to preach that Africa must respect Africa. We must celebrate who we are. That is why I'm perpetually grateful to people like Alan Oyema of Peace Airline, who took time out to evacuate and help his brothers stuck in Sudan. The Nigerian government, the Diaspora Committee, has also done its best. But as Africans, we must begin to say no to war. We must begin to get to the table and dialogue and negotiate. We must have diplomatic missions speak to one another. We must, as a continent, believe that we are one and that united we will conquer. We must change the banking culture. We must change the financial culture. We must change things that's making Africa to seem like we're standing. We must speak truth to power, and the power blocks of the world, be it anywhere, the West, the East, the South, or the North, must begin to bow to the significant importance of Africa in a general equation of things. So, right, come on, Africa, let's go.
Interesting to say, to call on Africa to say let's go, but how can we go if we have leadership on the continent, leadership that seem to be like they are, you know, they were, you know, hoisted or foisted on the people by some external powers.
That is why we must continue to speak truth to power. That is why we must continue to speak truth to power. Because there's no reason why you have the United Nations in New York. There's no reason why you have the world here in the States. We must begin to change all the dynamics, all the equation. You can't come to my continent with a piece of paper you've colored green and called the dollar, and take my diamond and take my gold and take my tea, and export it thousands of miles to my home country, refine it and sell it back to me as chocolate. You can buy oil thousands of miles away and bring it back and sell to me as kerosene or petrol. We must begin to change those dynamics. When we change those dynamics, then Africa will become the beacon of the world and the beacon of civilization. I doff my fedora, I doff my hat for Nobel laureate Professor Wolenka. I doff my fedora like the Oni Ife, Oba Tunde Enito Gunwusi. I bow my heart for kings like His Imperial Majesty, King Drolo Boso Adamtir of Ghana. These are young men who have stood up to say Africa, and Africa is today.
Wow. I do sincerely and honestly hope that the little contributions and the massive contributions made by individuals, high and low, will finally see the light of day and make a difference on the continent. And so, carrying on to a little, something a little less traumatic to wonder about or imagine. Let's go on to talking about all the highs and all the positives that this generation has strided towards as far as putting Africa on the map. I know you had mentioned earlier people like Davido and Burna Boy and what they've done. So I just want you to compare from your experience coming from the past as a fashion icon or a designer, and what you have today, the difference you can see, and how far you think this can go as far as rewriting cultural the cultural history of the continent and its people.
Professor Wole Soyinka did surmise that his generation is the wasted generation. I do not belong to that generation, and thus do not have the blood of Nigeria on my hands. I belong to a progressive generation, a generation of action, a generation of vision, a generation of imagination. It's high time we took the levers of power from the wasted generation, the generations of Europe. We must begin to redesign and rebrand who we are. We must begin to connect the dots, dot the I's and cross the T's. We must begin to build bridges, north, west, east, and south. We must build bridges across to other continents of the world. We must begin to identify with imaginative minds. People are sending astronauts to the moon in 2023 and 2022. And we're in Africa talking about petty politics. No, we must say to the geriatric generation, the old ones, that it's time that you leave. It's high time you left the scene so that young and imaginative minds can begin to redefine and redesign country or project Nigeria to the glory of God and to the service of humanity.
Right. And if you were to talk to young people, because we do know that tribalism, ethnocentric mindsets have caused more damage, to our way of life, religion, religious bigotry. All of these things have added to the negativity that is attainable on the continent. If you were to speak to young people, how would you begin to disabuse their minds of the negative impact of tribalism and ethnocentrism and all of these things that end up causing a lot of demarcation, whether it be in individual countries or across borders?
I am African. I am proud. I'm proud of my tribalism, if that's what you define it. But you see, we are all products of a different civilization. Our continent, Africa, is a village. Everyone takes care of the village. But we've been polluted by factors from the external. And it's time that we did away with these external factors or influences. I must say that on the continent of Africa, young people should begin to reposition themselves to take control of the ship of state. We must begin to speak truth to power. We must begin to understand that we're a people of law and order. We must begin to believe that we are all under one God, that service to humanity is the highest calling that we can ever have. I believe that Africa will emerge the greatest continent on earth because we've been so blessed. I believe because I am involved that Africa will remain the giant of the world.
Wow. Thank you for that. And so that this broadcast today is not going on for so long, I wanted to ask also how you're able to. I'm not sure if your fashion line is something that is only, it's something people in the United States of America can, lay their hands on. How do you distribute your fashion attires or designs? Is it something that you find on the continent?
Thank you for asking that question. I hear that question 1,000 times every day. I've lived in America for 20 years, and I have worked as a fashion consultant to major international labels. I needed to come here to reschool myself because the fashion I did back home in Africa is quite different from the fashion of today. Today, fashion is controlled by technology. I had to go back to school and learn the little tricks of the technological advancement in fashion. I have to understand the definition of fashion on the catwalks of Paris, London, and Milan. I have to put that definition in my head and recategorize and redefine it. I have to pick up Africa like Africa was a baby. I had to study the fabrics. I have to study our idiosyncrasies, our rites of passage. I have to capture the totality of our people, the fire, the nature of the essence of our humanity, and capture it in our clothing. So that indeed was a process. I had opportunities to work with major brands. I was invited by a good friend of mine who we all know, wanted me to design a line and wanted a line called a setting in. And I said, no, if I have to design a line that is contemporary Africa, it must be an African name. It must be Kese Jabari, the power look. And we had that contention in our contracts and I could not go with it. But for the first time, I have developed my line, and you'll be seeing my line in shops around Africa, in Ghana, in Cote d'Ivoire, in the US. You'll find my clothing in London. You'll find my clothing on the catwalks of London, Milan, Paris, South Africa, and on the catwalks in Lagos. So very soon you'll see that. But in the last couple of years, we've been involved with custom garment making. We are custom tailors to very, very eminent people around the world. We make garments, we make suits, we make kaftans, we make the three-piece agbada. We do all the complete garmentry for men. We also work in jewelry. We've done things for women around the world. And we're coming out with a pret-a-porter line that you can walk into a store like a Walmart or a Target and buy a Kessie Jabari t-shirt for X amount of dollars. Celebrating Africa, capturing our lifestyle, capturing the essence of our humanity, and celebrating our people, the icons, the philosophers of our time, speaking truth again to power and reorganizing the human cosmogony.
And just like you were blessed to travel to the United States and learn and unlearn some things and relearn some, do you have anything in the pipeline to also impact young fashion designers on the continent on how to do things a little differently, a little more sophisticatedly?
I would say to young designers in Africa that education is key. First, you must be a student of philosophy, you must be a student of literature, you must be a student of art, and you must be creative. Also, the benefit of travel is important. Sometimes you have to leave the land, Africa, and come to the land of white witches and white wizards and understand how things are done here. But looking back, I believe that in Africa, we have the power, we have the knowledge, we have the education to begin to define the contemporary African fashion statement. People before us and people after us will continue to contribute towards that fashion statement. I want to thank my friend Adebayo Jones out of London. I want to thank a couple of designers, Moody out of Africa. We're all talking, we're on the round table discussing projects that we can now use to relaunch Fashion Africana. A couple of years ago, I did the Rhythm Africana project, the spirit, the sign, the sound. We're bringing back Rhythm Africana, the spirit, the sign, the sound, to begin to celebrate Africa in its fashion nature and celebrate the look of our people, which is essential to our commonality as part of the universe.
And finally, the question I have next is, can arts do for Africa what the past failed generation of Professor Wole Soyinka couldn't do?
Could you say that again?
And can art do for Africa what a generation of the likes of Professor Wole Soyinka could not achieve? Can art, the sort of art that the young people are into now, can it do for
Yeah.
Africa what they could not achieve in the past generation?
It would be incorrect to surmise that generations before us, the likes of the much globally respected Professor Wole Soyinka, the Cyprian Ekwensis, the Chinwe Achebes of the world, they've committed and they've contributed immensely to arts and culture globally. So we are only the younger generations who are standing on the backs of these giants to continue to propagate the African experience. So allow me to say thank you, Ekushe and well done to the likes of Professor Wole Soyinka, the likes of the Prophet Fela Anikulapo Kuti, the likes of the Cyprian Ekwensis, the Chinwe Achebes. If you've read the work and the book Things Fall Apart, you would see the depth of that work of art. And as young people, we can only continue to celebrate and crawl on the backs of these giants. So kudos to them, kudos to this generation that we must, as a people, continue our reality.
And that will be all. But before you go, your final thoughts. Your final thoughts for the people of Africa and her diaspora on a high note.
I am African, I am king, I am servant.
Ooh, I am African, I am king, I am servant. That is powerful. That is powerful. Thank you so much, Dr. Casey Jabari. Is there any more information you'd like to share with us? As far as I know you're involved in a lot of other things that you haven't mentioned here on this broadcast. Please feel free to go ahead and tell us about all of the things you're into that you'd like young people to be involved in. I don't want to take it out of your mouth, so please go ahead. There's so many other things that I know you're involved in, education and so on and so forth. Is there any more information you'd like to share with us before we call it a day?
I'm involved in agriculture. I'm working with a company called World Holdings Tanzania Limited. We are investing heavily in agriculture on the continent. We're currently in Tanzania. We are growing, processing, and packaging cashew nuts and selling cashew nuts globally. We'll go into juices and other areas of agriculture. We'll be in Nigeria shortly under the invitation of His Imperial Majesty, the Oni Ife. We would also be in Nigeria under the superintendents of a few state governments to begin to make a dynamic turnaround in agriculture. I'm involved too with Kessie Jabari Foundation. We're shipping 40-foot containers of medical equipment to the continent. We've done immensely in Nigeria and other countries on the continent. So the work is ongoing, it's continuous, and we must do the work so that we can see the glory, to the glory of God and the glory of humanity.
And on that note, I just want to say a very big thank you for taking our time and to speak to us and with us. We look forward to seeing you again in the nearest future.
My pleasure, and thank you very much. Good evening.
Bye bye. Yes, thank you so very much, everyone who joined in on into this broadcast. Anyone who will be watching this broadcast later on, remember to still put your comments out there. If you haven't shared already, please do share this broadcast to as many people as you can. And of course, I will be acknowledging some of the names I've seen here: Anidor and Terabyte Troy. Thank you. And for all the rest in Charles Duneye, yes. For the rest of the crew who you cannot see, I just want to say a very big thank you for putting this together. And if you haven't liked, followed, or subscribed to our channels, please do so. It's Africa Rice TV on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. We will be coming live again as much as we can. It's been a pleasure. See you next time. Bye bye.